Let me ask you something honest. Have you ever looked at your calendar, your inbox, your phone, and realized everyone has access to you except you? I remember sitting in my car one afternoon, parked outside my house, engine off, hands on the steering wheel, just frozen. I didn't want to go inside because I knew the moment I stepped through the door, someone would need me, my kids, my team, the emails, the meetings, the friend who texts, got a sec, but really means, can I dump something heavy on you? And in that moment, I felt it, not burnout exactly, not stress. It was disappearance. I couldn't find myself anymore. We live in a world that rewards constant availability. But here's the hard truth. The more available you are to everyone else, the less available you are to your own life. And when you stop being available, when you say no, when you don't reply immediately, when you stop proving your worth through over-pro functioning, everything changes. I know that sounds heavy, maybe even a little uncomfortable, but let's sit with it for a minute. So many of us pride ourselves on being the go-to person, the one who always picks up, the one who never says no, the one who has their phone within arm's reach, just in case someone needs something. We call it being reliable, being dependable. But if we pull back the curtain, what we often find underneath is fear. Fear of not being needed, fear of being replaced, fear of letting someone down and then being judged or abandoned for it. And here's what I've learned from the research and from my own moments of hard truth. This kind of always on, always yes behavior doesn't come from strength. It comes from wounds we've never given ourselves permission to look at. Growing up, some of us were praised when we didn't have needs, when we were the quiet kid, the helpful kid, the one who didn't rock the boat. Maybe we learned that love came with conditions. If you're useful, you're safe. If you're easy, you're accepted. That kind of message gets into your bones. And then one day, you're an adult with a Google Calendar full of meetings, your partner saying we never talk anymore, and your body's screaming for rest, but you still feel guilty for not answering that email at 10 p.m. And this is what I mean when I say constant availability is a trauma response. It's the nervous system saying, if I don't show up, I might not belong. If I rest, I might be forgotten. If I stop, the world might move on without me. The problem is when we run our lives from that place, hypervigilance, over responsibility, we don't just lose time, we lose connection. We start confusing our worth with our productivity. We start measuring our goodness by how quickly we respond to other people's needs, even if it means ignoring our own. And let me tell you, the body keeps score. It doesn't matter how much you smile on the outside if your insides are constantly tight, anxious, and depleted. Over time, the cost of being everything to everyone is that you become nothing to yourself. In one study I looked at, participants who scored high on self-neglect in favor of social obligation also showed higher levels of emotional exhaustion, disrupted sleep, and identity diffusion. That means they couldn't even define who they were outside of their roles. That's not just burnout. That's a quiet kind of disappearance. We have to name this because once we name it, we can change it. And change begins with something as small and as radical as pausing before we say yes and asking, why am I saying yes? Is it because I really want to show up from a place of alignment? Or am I saying yes because I'm afraid of what will happen if I don't? That question alone can start to break the cycle. Because when you stop being constantly available, when you stop tying your value to your usefulness, what you make space for is authenticity. You make space for rest that isn't earned, for joy that isn't scheduled, for boundaries that don't require a crisis to be respected. You make space for you. This one hits close to home. For the longest time, I thought saying no was the equivalent of closing a door forever, or worse, slamming it in someone's face. I had this story in my head that every time I said no, someone out there would take it personally, feel rejected, and maybe even decide I wasn't worth sticking around for. That story, by the way, didn't come from logic, it came from fear. Fear rooted in years of trying to keep everyone comfortable, even at the cost of my own peace. But here's what I've learned and what the research supports. Saying no isn't an act of rejection. It's actually one of the clearest forms of self-respect. It's not about turning people away. It's about turning toward what matters most. One of the most powerful shifts we can make is moving from people-pleasing to purpose living. Because when we don't know how to say no, or when we avoid it out of guilt or fear, we end up living other people's priorities instead of our own. Saying no with intention doesn't mean you're being cold or unkind. In fact, it's the opposite. Clarity is kindness. When you say yes, but you don't really mean it. When you overcommit, resentfully agree, or show up half present, you're not doing anyone a favor. You're just quietly building up bitterness. And resentment left unchecked always leaks. It shows up in passive-aggressive comments, stress-induced exhaustion, and those quiet thoughts of, I wish I didn't have to be here, even when you love the person you're doing it for. I've seen this happen in leadership spaces, in families and marriages and friendships. We think keeping the peace means saying yes, but real peace doesn't come from compliance. It comes from congruence, from living in alignment with our values, our capacity, and our truth. In one study on emotional boundaries, researchers found that individuals who regularly practiced assertive refusal, not aggressive, just firm and honest, had significantly higher levels of self-efficacy and overall life satisfaction. They weren't pushing people away. They were creating a life they didn't need to escape from. What changed everything for me was realizing that every time I say no to something that doesn't serve me, I'm actually saying yes to something that does. Yes to more rest. Yes to deeper relationships built on honesty. Yes to projects that light me up instead of drain me. Yes to my family getting the best of me, not what's left of me. And let's be real, it's uncomfortable at first. The first few no's can feel like heartbreak, not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're breaking the old patterns that kept you safe and small. It's like stretching a new muscle. It aches before it strengthens. But here's the truth. You cannot live a meaningful life if you're unwilling to disappoint anyone. Saying no doesn't mean you're being difficult. It means you're being directed toward your own integrity, your values, your well-being. And the people who really love you, the ones who want you whole, not overextended, they'll understand. They might not love the no, but they'll respect it. And that respect will build more trust than any yes you ever gave out of guilt. This is one of the toughest lessons I've had to learn, and it's one I see so many people struggling with, myself included. We often think that if we're always there for someone, always answering their calls, texts, emails, always dropping what we're doing when they need us, that somehow this proves our love, that being available all the time means we're worthy of love. But that's a myth that sets us up for exhaustion, resentment, and a very shallow kind of connection. Here's the thing, love is not about being on demand. Love is about showing up fully when you do show up, not constantly just showing up to be seen as reliable or good enough. It's about presence, not presenceness. If that makes sense, being physically or digitally available 24/7 doesn't mean the heart is actually there. Sometimes we confuse quantity with quality, but love always prefers the latter. When we confuse availability with love, we start to expect that others should be available for us all the time too. That leads to misunderstandings, hurt feelings, and those invisible scorecards where we keep track of who replied first, who showed up when, who was there enough. And those scorecards, they don't build trust. They build walls. Love at its core is built on trust. And trust doesn't come from constant presence. It comes from reliability and respect. It comes from knowing someone will show up when it matters most. It comes from boundaries that say, I care for you enough to honor my own limits so I can be fully here for you. Because if I say yes to everything, I say no to myself, and then I'm less able to show up as my best, most loving self. There's this beautiful paradox. When you respect your boundaries and create space for yourself, you actually deepen your relationships. I know it feels counterintuitive, like if you step back, you might lose people, but what happens instead is that you build a relationship that isn't based on obligation or guilt. You build a relationship based on mutual respect and genuine connection. Science supports this. Studies on attachment and adult relationships show that secure attachments aren't about constant contact, but about consistent care. It's the feeling that you can rely on someone when it really counts, not that they'll answer a text the second it arrives. This also means we have to get comfortable with the discomfort of not being available sometimes. That moment when you don't pick up the phone because you need rest, or when you say no to a gathering because your energy is spent. That discomfort is real. It can feel like letting someone down, but it's also the place where love grows, because love requires space to breathe, not suffocate. And here's a hard truth. The people who truly love you will want you whole, not just available. They want your presence, yes, but they also want your joy, your peace, your authenticity. They want you to show up when you're really there, not just because you can't say no. So the next time you find yourself equating your worth with how available you are, pause. Remember that love doesn't demand you be constantly reachable. Love asks you to be real, to be honest, to be brave enough to say, I'm here when it matters most, even if that means you're not always there. And that changes everything. There's something powerful about taking back control over your own time. It's not just about having free hours in your day. It's about what those hours represent. When you stop being available all the time, you're saying yes to you. And that yes, it's a declaration that your life, your needs, your dreams matter just as much as anyone else's. I've watched so many people, myself included, lose themselves in the endless cycle of availability. We become a checklist for everyone else's needs, and somewhere along the way, we forget who we are underneath all the doing. I'm talking about that part of you that exists beyond the roles you play, the loving partner, the dependable colleague, the ever-present parent, the friend who never says no. There's a whole person in there, often starving for attention. When you reclaim your time, you reclaim access to that person, you create the space to connect with your values, your passions, your rest. Suddenly, your life isn't just about keeping everyone else's world spinning. It's about your own world. This is deeply tied to identity, because identity is not a fixed thing. It's a living, breathing story we tell ourselves about who we are. When your story is all about availability, about being the person who never says no, you start to believe that's all you are. But when you say, no, not right now, or I need time for myself, you disrupt that story. You give yourself permission to be more than the person everyone relies on. And that permission is transformative. It can feel uncomfortable because you're challenging years, maybe decades of conditioning. But research shows that people who set firm boundaries and prioritize self-care report a stronger sense of self, better mental health, and more meaningful connections with others. In fact, in a 2020 longitudinal study, participants who engaged in regular boundary setting exercises experienced significant increases in self-esteem and decreases in anxiety symptoms within just a few months. Taking back your time isn't selfish. It's essential. It's like putting on your own oxygen mask first before helping others. If you're depleted, how can you show up fully for the people who matter to you? The quality of your presence is directly connected to the quality of your self-care. When you start saying no to distractions, to obligations that don't align with your values, you start saying yes to creativity, to joy, to rest, to healing. You remember what lights you up, what makes you feel alive, and who you want to become. That's identity work. And here's a truth I hold close. Reclaiming your time doesn't mean you'll be perfect at it. You'll mess up, you'll overcommit, you'll feel guilty. But the practice of returning to your boundaries, of recommitting to your values, is what shapes a life that feels authentic and whole. So when you stop being available all the time, you don't just get your calendar back, you get yourself back. And that changes everything. This is a truth that's hard to swallow, but it's one I've come to live by. When you start setting boundaries and stop being constantly available, someone, maybe many someones, will be disappointed. It's an inevitable part of the process. And here's the kicker. That discomfort, that feeling of letting someone down, is the very price we pay for living authentically. For so long, we've been taught that disappointing others is wrong, that it's selfish or unkind. But the truth is, you cannot be authentic and please everyone at the same time. It's a paradox we have to accept. Because when you begin to show up as your true self, when you say no, when you choose your needs, you're disrupting the expectations others have of you. And that disruption feels like rejection to them, even if it's an act of radical self-care on your part. I remember early in my work when I started saying no to invitations, requests, even emotional labor that drained me. I felt this wave of guilt and anxiety. I worried people would think I was being cold or uncaring. But what I've learned, and what the research shows, is that disappointment is not betrayal. It's part of emotional maturity. It's part of real relationships. In studies on interpersonal boundaries, researchers found that people who were willing to accept the discomfort of disappointing others and to communicate their boundaries clearly actually experience deeper and more resilient relationships. Why? Because boundaries build trust. They say, I respect you enough to be honest, and I respect myself enough to be clear. When you put yourself first, sometimes that's not selfish. That's the foundation for sustainable love and connection. You become someone who can give from a place of fullness, not depletion. You model for others that it's okay to have limits, and that those limits don't diminish your value or your love for them. Yes, it's uncomfortable at first. The initial wave of disappointment can feel like a punch to the gut, but that discomfort is temporary. And over time, it becomes easier to hold space for it because you begin to see that disappointing others does not equal losing them. It equals growing yourself. One of the most courageous things you can do is to let go of the need for universal approval, because it simply doesn't exist. Trying to be everything for everyone is a recipe for exhaustion and invisibility. But when you accept that some people will be disappointed, you free yourself to be your whole, imperfect, beautiful self. The people who truly matter, the ones who value you beyond your availability, they'll stick around. They might feel disappointed at times, sure, but they'll respect your honesty and integrity. They'll learn from your courage. And often they'll be inspired to set boundaries of their own. Authenticity requires discomfort, but it also offers liberation. When you're willing to embrace the uneasy feeling of letting others down, you step into a life where you don't have to apologize for who you are or sacrifice your well-being to prove your worth. That's a life worth living, and it's waiting for you on the other side of that discomfort. So here's the truth I want you to carry with you. When you stop being constantly available, everything changes. Not because you become less, but because you become more. More present, more authentic, more connected to the life you're meant to live. It's not easy. It takes courage to say no, to disappoint, to reclaim your time and your identity. But it's the kind of courage that transforms not just your world, but the worlds of those around you. Remember, you are worthy of boundaries. You are worthy of rest. You are worthy of love that doesn't demand your availability 24/7. And when you honor that worth, you create space for true connection and deep belonging. This is your invitation to step back, breathe, and choose yourself without apology. Because when you do, everything changes. Good luck on this journey. I'm rooting for you.